On this episode of Film Finds, I will be taking a look at Carnival of Souls. Though the only feature film by director Herk Harvey, he managed to create a style that would inspire many, a film so ahead of its time I wish I could travel back just to tell him to make more. Carnival of Souls feels like a David Lynch film about a decade before Lynch started making films. Released in 1962, the film has a surprisingly ominous atmosphere. It is the story of a woman who becomes the sole survivor of a car plunging into a river. She soon moves to another town, where she begins to be haunted by visions of a ghastly man. At the edge of this town is an abandoned carnival that continuously calls to her. One of the most immediately obvious strengths of the film is its use of sound. Mary Henry is an organist, and music naturally plays a chaotic force. Even the purpose of music is questioned, as she begins to work at a church despite being irreligious. Music soon becomes a reminder of the inescapability of death, and actively unseats her life. This is another film that manages creative use of the low budget. The shots of the man, played by the director himself, have a grainy quality. The lack of a hard image lends him this otherworldly appearance, helping push beyond the limits of makeup. The way Mary responds to her situation isn't quite right. She sees this ghastly man, but almost accepts his presence. Though first afraid, most of her encounters find her staring into the distance, simply waiting for him to disappear. It's as if she's accepted something in her life isn't alright, though she lacks the awareness to know exactly what. For the type of film it is, Carnival of Souls has some surprisingly well-defined secondary characters. Most memorable is Mary's skeevy neighbor, John Linden. He presents himself as an everyman, but his peering glances and confrontational nature suggest something more sinister at play. Even these seemingly normal people carry a few odd quirks, suggesting something with the world at large isn't quite right. She finds psychological assistance from a doctor who is now a psychiatrist. And, despite his nature, it's ultimately John who becomes frightened of Mary. It's as if both the supernatural and reality are conspiring against her. Circling back to sound, perhaps the most effective moment of the film are when Mary seems to become completely detached from the world around her. People carry conversations in silence, Mary horrified as no one seems to notice her presence. Like the best psychological horrors, we're forced into Mary's perspective. It's never clear if she's simply losing her mind due to emotional trauma, or if something truly supernatural is occurring. The shots within the abandoned carnival are key examples of how to make use of a setting. Objects move on their own, but in just the right way that could just as easily be the effects of the wind or gravity. Some rooms appear to go on forever, their emptiness overwhelming. The fact nothing really happens on her first visit makes it even more unsettling. There's clearly something wrong, but the film won't let it step in. There's no moment of release, just a growing anticipation for something to truly go wrong. Though the visions of that man are frightening, any brief moment of horror is only there to set the stage for a horrifying finale. And as we wind closer to the conclusion, the visions become more and more dense. Carnival of Souls is an effective horror because it so rarely seeks to scare. Instead, it plays like a moral tale, more like Bergman than the B-movie it is. This is the story of a woman losing all sense of purpose, slowly succumbing to an unknown dark force. There's a growing sense of hopeless resignation throughout. This is supported by how the horror unfolds. Despite the ominous man, Mary allows herself to be drawn to the carnival. It's as if she spends this film slowly accepting her fate, despite not knowing what that fate will turn out to be. Ultimately, this is a clear precursor to other purgatorial works, from Eraserhead to the Silent Hill video game series. But what makes it so compelling is how it's not just a prototype. At its height, this early 60s B-movie can get just as far under your skin, and that's with less surface-level horror. This is a film that runs purely on dread. And, though I want to avoid the details, I have to say, the payoff here is absolutely mesmerizing. In a film already rife with symbolism, Harvey allows the imagery to speak for itself, creating the worst kind of waking nightmare. Carnival of Souls is the type of film that would be a bona fide classic if it had a more notable name attached. It's almost tragic to witness such an effective work of cinema, and realize there's no trail to follow. But few directors have shown such a perfect understanding of what lies at the root of most human fears, so expertly mixing in a real sense of existentialism. This is as much a supernatural horror as it is a personal journey in the mind of a traumatized woman. There are few directors who hit it out of the park on their first attempt, and even fewer who never pick up the camera again. Herk Harvey sits right up there with directors like Gene Vigo and Charles Lawton, artists so revolutionary but so limited in either time or resources that all we can do is sadly ponder what works they could have made.